Welcome to the first podcast of The Conversation Stopper. I'm Michele Keffen. I'm a fashion designer, an artist. I do contemporary and abstract expressionist art. I have an interest in human rights and particularly indentured labour. I'm with my friend Sharon, who's going to introduce herself, and then we're going to explain what the purpose is of our podcast.
Okay, I'm Sharon Caldwell Evans. I've double-barreled my name.
You poshed it up.
Yes, I've poshed it up, at Michelle's suggestion, I might add. And it's mainly from Facebook, I must tell you. It's mainly from Facebook because we can't be found if we use our married names, because our friends from school can't find us. But that's the only reason really that I did it, and it works. I'm a married person for 35 years to the same chap.
Which is a privilege.
It's a privilege for me. I don't know if he would call it the same thing. And I have 3 children, and I've studied. I have a degree. I recently did my honours in English and wrote a thesis which caught Michelle's attention and has started this whole ball rolling. I am a person who has a great interest in educating people. I started my education late, and I think that's what started that off. Is I think I could have gained an education earlier in life, but I started my education late, and so I have a passion for educating people as early as possible. And I like standing up in front of people and talking about things. So I think the Conversation Stopper is going to be a good platform for both Michelle and I to get our points across. We have some interesting conversations to start, and Michelle's going to take over from here and tell you about our first conversation, which is quite
so one of the things we're going to do with the Conversation Stopper has been, well, particularly in a lot of my art in the past has the current conversations I'm working on now, deal with unpopular subjects, things people don't want to discuss. They're not polite conversations, so they tend to get swept under the rug. Sharon and I both have this very strong feelings about those kind of issues. Because of Sharon's thesis, which we'll probably cover in a little while, we're going to start off with gender-based violence, and particularly incest related to gender-based violence. So the first Conversation Stopper, the first phase of the Conversation Stopper, is going to be dealing with incest, not as in two consenting adults, but where gender-based violence touches, where the two circles overlap. I don't know if you wanted to just give us a little touch about what your thesis was.
I do. So as part of my recent education, before embarking on my honours degree, I became a doula. And a doula is a birth support person, usually a woman. I don't know if there are men who do the job. It's usually a woman who has had children of her own. And we do birth support from before, if possible, in the ideal circumstances, from before labour starts until after the baby's born. I did most of my birth support in state hospitals in South Africa, where I met the labouring mother when she was usually well into her labour. Sometimes it was while she was waiting for labour to start, if she was being induced. And I met some people who were unfortunate victims of some horrendous crimes in South Africa, which actually have gone unpunished, because the young girls were afraid to come forward to tell people what had happened. They were afraid to point out the perpetrator of the crimes. They were afraid to tell people who had raped them, who the father of the baby was, and it's understandable. They also were left in the situation where they went home with that baby, which was their sibling. Sometimes it was a cousin who'd raped them, or a brother. It's a crime that is very underrated, and we don't know the numbers because a lot of them aren't reported. And when I did my honours degree, I decided that it was a form of slavery, it's a form of bullying, and it was something I wanted to write about. So I compared it to some slavery books that I was reading, and I wrote about it. And Michele read my thesis, and she was touched by it, I think.
And also reminded me of a lot of those kind of people that I'd met that had experienced those kind of things.
Yes.
I mean, I've mentioned it before, even 30 years later, I still remember someone who, as an educated woman, presented the fact that her first child was also her brother, and she felt that she'd done the family a favour because at least Dad didn't need to use prostitutes. So, and that's how she convinced herself about it. And I find that even now, today, 30 years later, incredibly sad.
It's horrendous. It's horrendous. It brings a lump to your throat to think that people think they are actually, number one, that it's okay. That it's okay, that you actually can put an excuse behind it.
I think they do it as a survival technique, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just put it behind you and say, okay, well, I'll do this because it has to be done. You know, someone's got to do it.
So, with us choosing gender-based violence and incest as being the first part of the Conversation Stopper podcast, we did a bit of research, obviously, and found out that there's 6 types of gender-based violence, generally speaking. So it's violence against women, violence against LGBTQ community, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, sexual violence, and indirect or structural violence. So I would imagine that's some kind of government institution. Yeah. And I personally think there possibly needs to be, I'm going to vote for a 7th category, but we will get to that.
I'll vote with you.
Okay. The main intention of our podcast is definitely to start dialogue about these difficult subjects. And so there's various ways to contact us, and Sharon's got some options.
Yes. So obviously, once this podcast airs, there will be a space underneath where you can put a comment. You could then leave your name, or it could be anonymous. I think there is an option to be anonymous. Yes. So you could leave a comment where you could tell us what you think of this initiative. You could tell us where you found help, if you've managed to be fortunate enough to find help, what the help was like, and whether it was successful for you. And that will help us to aim towards organizations that can help, and where we can go and possibly give our aid, because we're hoping to raise funds as well. The other option is to go to our Facebook page, which is called The Conversation Stopper, and there you can post a comment, but then obviously you will be, it's public, so your name will be there, as well as your Facebook page will be available for public viewing, or you could send us a private message. So those are 3 options that are easily available to you. I will get Michele to post my email address, which is very easy to find if you don't want to wait. It's sharoncaldwellevans@gmail.com. You can send me an email. We would like to hear your story. We want to hear you. We want to share your story. We want your tale to be told. Everything that's shared it's always easier to bear.
And also, if you feel like you're not alone.
Yes, you feel like you're not alone. Someone's heard you. We are here to hear you. We want to hear your story. We will respect your privacy. There's absolutely no doubt about that. There's no question about that. We are planning an art piece. So Michelle's going to mention a few minutes about that. She's not going to talk too long about that, because that's for our next podcast. But we are preparing an art piece which we are going to auction off to raise funds to continue our awareness program. And your contributions your story contributions will help us to direct our future endeavors.
And also add depth to the art piece. Because we want the art piece to be not done within a vacuum, but rather to be done from the ground roots up.
Exactly.
So one of the important things that although we both come from Africa, we're born in South Africa, and that's where we've become aware of this problem. We definitely feel that, we know it's a worldwide problem. It's not just an African problem. And there's some stats which are just shocking. This is our second take, and part of the problem we needed to do a second take was because I think I was just so overwhelmed by the statistics. Yesterday, So things like, for instance, in Bolivia, the charity Sharon received hundreds of calls from girls, including a 10-year-old that was pregnant in labour, trying to get to the hospital. She'd been gang raped by her cousins, and the soldiers turned her back into the same household to where she eventually links down at the bottom of the various articles I'm referencing. Also,
was this during lockdown?
Yes.
Right. So that's why she
the soldiers
turned her back.
Yes,
okay.
Turned her back. And she also was too scared to tell them that she was in labour, and she wasn't quite sure if she was in labour because she was so young.
And she was 10.
Yes.
Goodness me.
But I just really felt so sorry for that child. Called the hotline, and they managed to send out some help. So I'm going to spoke in 2013 about the States and some of the statistics about the States, where it's 1 in 3 to 4 girls is sexually abused, but it's also 1 in 5 to 7 boys that's sexually abused, and the majority of that abuse, that sexual abuse, happens in the household. So this goes back to the fact that I think there needs to be a 7th category of gender-based abuse, because in the end, when you look at all those categories, none of them would fit in most of those boys.
Absolutely.
So to me, I think that's really unfair to exclude it. So I'm voting for that, and I'm going to see if we can do something about that. On the January 2022, the Observer in Uganda newspaper showed that there was an increase due to lockdown in incest, and also it sheds light on this culture of victim blaming. I mean, obviously, poor girl has to come back with an extra mouth to feed, and the family's under financial strain and all the problems with lockdown. So we'll put the link up for that. So I found that, I think that's something we can identify. We understand.
Yes, we understand that. And it's not only in Uganda, it's anywhere that a young girl comes home with another mouth to feed, and it's the judgment that she comes home with. That culture of blaming and judgment, it's always there. It's like, who have you been sleeping with? Who's the father? And she can't say. She can't say, or she's too afraid to say.
And also because there's a financial dependence as well.
Absolutely.
And we're also not talking about a lot of places that don't want nanny states. So it's not like there's some kind of benefit system that they can latch into.
And they judge her. That's the worst part. They judge her, and she's the innocent.
The other thing which I found really interesting, Sharon, was in 2014, the World Health Organization, this is according to Medical Science Monitor, classifies incest as being the silent health emergency. So I'd really like us, when we do one of our other podcasts, to come back and see what strategies the World Health Organization has placed in place since 2014, because it's now 2021.
Absolutely.
22, and see what's actually been in place and see how effective they are.
Yes. What have they done?
Yeah, what's been done, yes, and how's it? In 2021, the Australian Kids Helpline showed a 49% increase in phone calls during the beginning of lockdown, which is extraordinary. I know, without the devil's advocate hat on, it's not all to do with incest, but and sexual violence, but there's no doubt that obviously there was a huge amount of strain on families. Yeah. So Sharon and I both endorse it, the UK, and so we looking at what's close to home, really, as well.
Yes.
And it's interesting that in June 2021, Cornwall and Devon were shown to have an increase in incest. Somerset Live in 2020, they said they had a 46% increase in incest, which I think is extraordinary.
That's huge.
The Examiner Live reported that West Yorkshire has the greatest incidence of reported incest. I've used the word reported because they didn't, but we've always got to keep that in mind.
Yes, and if it wasn't reported, they wouldn't know about it.
But I found that interesting because there was 94 cases, and yet the whole metropolitan area of London only had 14.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, cases. And again, it's the reported thing. Kent had 58. Also found an article which I sort of vaguely remember when I saw, which was about the man in Swansea that fathered 6 children with his daughter.
That was some time ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'd like to look into that, but I think they've revisited it as well. So because the first article I found said that he'd been sentenced to 15 years, and then I found another article which said 40 years. Okay. So I think maybe we can revisit that again in another podcast.
Yes, we can do. Yes.
But we definitely feel that there's almost like this perfect storm that's happened I know it's a bit of a sort of sailing term, but I think after the George Clooney film, everybody understands what that means.
Yes.
And it's because there's been lockdown where there's restricted movement with the abuser who is under financial and emotional pressure because everybody was affected financially through lockdown in any country. Also, the interesting point, which is brought up by quite a number of articles, including one from Child Hub, is the fact is that there's lack of contact with people that would normally pick up the signs, or people that are educated enough to pick up the signs or have been trained to see the symptoms of
teachers.
Yes, teachers, the coaches,
nursery school teachers.
Yeah. But then also there's the rise of incest pornography. So my husband sort of heard a radio program on it, and then I started doing some more research, and there's not only a rise in what they call in incest pornography, but also in phocest, where it's role playing of various forms. And I'm going to actually use my laptop, so I know it sounds a bit rude, but the stats are just so, I don't want to get them wrong, but they're so astounding.
I was going to say, it's not rude to use your laptop. Let's get this right.
Let's just start with that one. So this is from The Guardian.
I wanted to say, I like the ad in there.
Yes, I know, I saw the...
Quit porn for good. I mean, seriously. Help to quit porn.
So there's an article from The Guardian which points out then that these fetish fantasies of sex with children, how it's normalising child abuse. And there's some very interesting quotes from one of the workers who's in charge of, who is the lead on child abuse for Bernardo's, and how she's feeling that it's emboldening the predators.
And paedophiles.
Yes. And just making it seem far more sort of okay than what it was. There's a lot of blaming storylines like, Game of Thrones, where it's sort of normalising it from an entertainment point of view. I think what I found absolutely astounding is the amount of pornography that there is. It's just unbelievable. There was
easily available,
but it's the amounts. There was an amount where Pornhub was investigated, and they had 13 million videos. And then after the New York Times investigated them, brought it forward, they then went through and they purged a lot of the unverified incest-based videos. And that reduced the number down to 4 million. From 13 million down to 4 million. So I worked that out. That's about 69% reduction. And there's no way that that's not then one of the primary ways of
absolutely
getting revenue.
Absolutely.
And it's one of the largest platforms, and it's not the only platform. So we'll definitely put those links forward. But it's almost like, because there's social consciousness, then there's lockdown where you have confined movement, and then you have lack of contact. It's almost like there's been this flurry of incest.
Yeah.
And gender-based violence.
And I would like to just put in another small little, it's not a statistic, it's just a mention. In South Africa, they banned alcohol and cigarettes during one of the lockdowns.
Yeah, it was nothing like the UK lockdown at all.
Yeah. So you had people at home couldn't go to work, plus they couldn't smoke, which people are addicted to nicotine, let's face it.
Yeah, they're going through withdrawal.
Okay? And they couldn't drink. So some people were getting their liquor from
black market
or bootleggers, and they were coming home and they were being violent with their families. So it wasn't necessarily incest, but it was certainly gender-based, because the wife and the children were the people who ended up being the ones suffering under the abuse. So definitely lockdown has a lot to answer for.
Yeah, because it changed the dynamic of family life.
It did. And I think that under those circumstances, when families are locked down in a home, in one home, in a small space, the neighbours don't necessarily see what's going on. And the children have nowhere to run to.
And also there is an element of not getting involved.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
just don't
absolutely.
get involved.
Especially when it's a violent man. You know, neighbours are afraid to get involved.
So I'm going to do an art piece as part of a fundraiser.
Yes.
After much thought, I've decided to do a tapestry purely because I really like the interpretation of it being not only mother to daughter, but also, you know, a nurturing thing. The reason you teach your child a skill like weaving, which is something that's very common not only in Africa but in many parts of the world, whether it's basket weaving or fabric weaving or leather weaving. All of that comes down to the fact that you're giving your child a skill so that they can then feed themselves. They can then look after themselves and their family. So it's almost like an investment in the future. So I wanted to use that. I also wanted to use my knowledge of fibres and fabrics. I was very fortunate to meet meet someone that who in the past who was just really good at making dyes out of the natural berries and lichens and bark and all that kind of stuff. And I was fortunate enough to spend a short time with Berber people, and it was lovely to see the amount of colours that they can get from natural fibres and natural dyes. So we definitely want to go use that route through the tapestry. I also want to use man-made fibres like single-use plastics, because I feel that we have such an artificial way of life now, and because of that artificial life we have so many more pressures, and that seems to bring out sometimes the worst in mankind, womankind, and families. Yeah. And Sharon heard something interesting on the radio on the way here to film, because she's off to South Africa soon, so we'll catch up at the next podcast, shall we?
Yes. Yes.
After you come back.
We need more people to know.
And especially because of the increase, what we were talking about, where we've had this almost perfect storm of these three things aligning. Anyway, but Sharon is off to South Africa.
Yes, I am.
She's going to go and see her mum.
I am. So I will be there for 2 weeks, and I hope that during that time I'll be able to make contact with some people in Cape Talk. The radio station there. I'm hoping they're going to answer our emails. If not, I'm going to phone in when they're on air
and emotionally
blackmail them, and try and get some airtime there to further our cause in that respect. Because the more airtime we can get, obviously, the better. And I'm going to approach some of the galleries as well and see whether we can perhaps get some space to put up some artwork.
Anyway, we'll catch up with you after that.
Absolutely.